The Scheldt Estuary, stretching through the heart of the Netherlands and Belgium, was more than just a winding waterway. During the final phases of World War I, it held the key to one of the most pressing challenges facing the Allies: access to Antwerp, the largest port in Western Europe. After the success of the Normandy campaign, Allied forces were advancing deep into occupied Europe, but their supply lines were dangerously overstretched. Every tank, every shell, every loaf of bread depended on the ability to move supplies efficiently. Without Antwerp, the Allies faced a logistical nightmare, with supplies having to travel hundreds of miles from the beaches of Normandy. Control of the Scheldt was therefore not just strategic, it was vital. Yet, the estuary was a fortress in its own right. German forces had transformed it into a deadly maze of flooded fields, reinforced villages, and heavy coastal guns capable of targeting any approaching fleet. To break through this barrier, the Allies would need courage, precision, and unyielding determination. This story is not just about military maneuvers or historical strategy. It is about the people who faced unimaginable obstacles in the mud, water, and fire of the Scheldt. It is about the ingenuity of soldiers who adapted to flooded landscapes with amphibious vehicles, the planning that turned near-impossible assaults into triumphs, and the perseverance that finally opened the gateway to Antwerp. Join us as we explore the Battle of the Scheldt, a pivotal yet often overlooked chapter of World War I that shaped the path to victory in Europe. If you love uncovering history's hidden stories, do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a journey into the past that changes the way you see it today. As the Allies surged through France following the success of the Normandy landings, the exhilaration of victory was tempered by an urgent and looming problem. Supplies, every advancing soldier, every armored vehicle, and every essential resource depended on a continuous stream of provisions. Yet the lifeline from the beaches of Normandy stretched over 300 miles, threading through liberated yet fragile territories, winding along roads still pockmarked from battle, and passing through bridges and rail lines vulnerable to disruption. This immense distance not only slowed the movement of tanks and artillery, but also threatened to stall the momentum that had been so painstakingly built since D-Day. For the commanders, the push toward Germany was a race against time, where a delayed shipment of ammunition or fuel could mean the difference between a decisive strike and a stalled front. Antwerp, with its deep water port capable of handling the immense cargo necessary to sustain an entire army, represented the solution to this peril. Yet gaining control of the port was far from simple. The Scheldt Estuary, the waterway connecting Antwerp to the North Sea, was heavily fortified and deliberately flooded by German forces, turning the surrounding terrain into a treacherous mixture of mud, water, and hidden defenses. Villages had been transformed into strongholds, artillery batteries perched on riverbanks, and every potential approach was a calculated trap. The Allies could not simply march in. They had to navigate a labyrinth of natural and man-made obstacles, where a single misstep could cost countless lives. The struggle for the Scheldt became a test of strategy, courage, and relentless determination. Soldiers waded through flooded fields under the constant threat of enemy fire. Engineers worked tirelessly to repair bridges and construct makeshift crossings, and commanders coordinated assaults with a precision born of necessity. Every inch of ground gained came at a cost, yet each small victory brought the port of Antwerp closer to Allied hands, promising a lifeline that would transform the campaign. The estuary's treacherous waters were a battlefield in themselves, as amphibious units maneuvered through narrow channels, avoiding mines and artillery, while infantry pushed forward across soggy dikes and ruined villages. Victory at the Scheldt did more than secure a port. It breathed new life into the Allied advance. With Antwerp open, supplies could flow directly to the front lines, shortening the logistical chain from 300 miles to a matter of hours by ship, allowing tanks to keep moving, artillery to remain supplied, and soldiers to press forward with renewed confidence. The battle demonstrated that control of key infrastructure could dictate the pace of an entire campaign, and it highlighted the interplay between strategy, geography, and human determination in the midst of war. The path to Germany was no longer hampered by a fragile supply line stretching back to Normandy. It was reinforced by a port that could sustain armies, deliver relief, and provide the backbone for the Allies' final push into the heart of occupied Europe. The Battle of the Scheldt, often overshadowed by more famous confrontations, revealed that victory depended as much on logistics and perseverance as it did on courage and firepower, and it underscored the immense stakes faced by those who dared to transform a flooded estuary into a gateway for triumph. The Scheldt Estuary was more than just a river leading to a vital port. It was a fortress meticulously designed by the Germans to defy any attempt at liberation. As the Allies approached, they faced a landscape that had been transformed into a web of deliberate obstacles, where nature and engineering were turned against them with ruthless efficiency. Coastal guns, emplaced on elevated banks and hidden among ruined buildings, commanded sweeping fields of fire, able to devastate any approaching convoy or infantry formation. These artillery positions were carefully camouflaged, often indistinguishable from the surrounding terrain until the moment they opened fire, and they were supported by smaller anti-tank and machine gun nests, creating interlocking zones of lethal coverage that left attackers with nowhere to hide. Beyond the guns, the Germans had manipulated the very land itself into a weapon. Polders, low-lying tracts of land crisscrossed with dikes and canals, were deliberately flooded, creating shallow lakes and quagmires that swallowed men, vehicles, and equipment alike. What might have seemed like open fields were actually treacherous marshes where tanks could become bogged down and infantry struggled through knee-deep mud, slowed and vulnerable to enemy fire. Roads were mined, bridges rigged to explode at the first sign of assault, and every village along the estuary had been fortified with barricades, sniper positions, and hidden bunkers, turning homes and churches into deadly strongpoints. Each street, each canal crossing, each ruined farmhouse became part of a carefully orchestrated defense designed to bleed the attackers dry before they could reach the port beyond. The human cost of this defensive ingenuity was immediate and relentless. Allied soldiers found themselves wading through knee-deep waters under a storm of machine gun fire, their progress measured in meters rather than miles. Engineers worked feverishly to construct makeshift crossings and clear paths through the flooded terrain, often under direct observation from enemy gunners who seemed to anticipate every move. Coordinated artillery barrages sought to neutralize the fortified villages. Yet the Germans' positions were so entrenched that every successful hit often revealed yet another hidden emplacement, another lethal trap waiting to strike. The combination of natural and man-made defenses turned the estuary into a maze where each step forward demanded courage, ingenuity, and unyielding determination. Yet, amid water and destruction, the Allies pressed on, understanding that Antwerp's port was the prize worth every risk. Each captured village, each cleared dike, each silenced gun was a step closer to shortening the perilous 300-mile supply line stretching back to Normandy, a line that had threatened to stall the advance into Germany. The battle for the Scheldt became a lesson in patience and persistence, where strategy was tested against the raw ingenuity of a defender determined to make the cost of victory unbearably high. Soldiers adapted, learning to navigate the flooded polders, coordinate assaults on fortified houses, and use artillery in innovative ways to neutralize the enemy's advantage, while commanders orchestrated multi-pronged attacks designed to stretch the Germans thin across an expansive and hostile landscape. Ultimately, the fortifications that had seemed nearly impenetrable proved to be formidable, but not insurmountable. The Allies' relentless advance, coupled with ingenuity and sheer endurance, gradually turned the tide, and each gain along the estuary brought them closer to the long-awaited opening of Antwerp. The Germans' elaborate defenses had delayed the Allies and exacted a heavy toll. But they could not stop the combination of determination, coordination, and resourcefulness that pressed forward against the odds. The Scheldt Estuary, with its coastal guns, flooded polders, dikes, and fortified villages, became a testament to the deadly interplay of terrain, engineering, and human resolve, and its conquest demonstrated that even the most daunting defenses could be overcome when purpose, planning, and perseverance converged in the crucible of battle. Despite the urgency imposed by the 300-mile supply line stretching back to Normandy, the momentum of the Allied advance was hampered not by German defenses alone, but by disagreements among the Allied leadership that had far-reaching consequences on the battlefield. At the heart of the tension were General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, and Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, Commander of the 21st Army Group, whose contrasting visions of strategy slowed the initiation of the Scheldt offensive, inadvertently granting the Germans precious time to bolster their positions. While Eisenhower prioritized the swift exploitation of the Normandy breakthrough and a direct push toward Germany to maintain momentum, Montgomery advocated for a methodical approach to secure key positions in Belgium, including Antwerp, before pressing forward. This divergence of priorities, seemingly abstract at command headquarters, translated into concrete delays that would prove costly for the soldiers who would soon confront the Scheldt's treacherous terrain. The Germans, ever alert to the opportunities presented by hesitation, seized the reprieve with grim efficiency. Engineers reinforced dikes, expanded artillery emplacements, and flooded additional polders, turning natural and man-made obstacles into an even more formidable barrier. Villages were fortified with new bunkers, and machine gun nests multiplied in strategic intersections and along the banks of the estuary, creating overlapping fields of fire that turned every approach into a potential death trap. Soldiers arriving at the front were confronted not merely by the landscape, but by a deeply entrenched enemy, whose reinforcements had transformed previously manageable positions into near impenetrable strongholds. What might have been a rapid advance now promised to be a grinding, costly engagement, as each meter forward demanded careful coordination, ingenuity, and the willingness to endure intense hardship. The delay also had psychological ramifications, as the men on the front lines understood that every day of hesitation allowed the enemy to deepen their defenses and tighten the grip on the estuary. Allied commanders had to contend not only with the physical challenges of flooded polders and fortified villages, but also with the pressure of time, and knowing that the success of the broader campaign hinged on reopening Antwerp's port. Logistical planners worried about dwindling supplies and stretched convoys, while field commanders had to rethink assault strategies to account for the strengthened German positions. Coordination between air, land, and artillery units became more complex, requiring precise timing and communication to avoid catastrophic losses. Yet, within the delays and the mounting challenges, the Allies' resolve hardened. Lessons learned from previous battles informed tactical adjustments. Infantry units rehearsed amphibious crossings and coordinated attacks on fortified villages, while engineers developed new techniques to breach dikes and navigate the flooded terrain. The seeming paralysis at the top became a catalyst for ingenuity at the operational level, as soldiers and lower-ranking commanders improvised solutions to obstacles that had been compounded by time and hesitation. Every successful maneuver, every captured strongpoint, carried the weight of overcoming not only the German fortifications, but also the invisible cost of strategic disagreement that had allowed those fortifications to grow stronger. Ultimately, the delays imposed by the debate between Eisenhower and Montgomery highlighted the human dimension of warfare, where decisions made in distant headquarters reverberate across the landscape. influencing the lives of thousands of men who would pay the price in blood and endurance. The Germans may have gained time, but the Allies' capacity to adapt and persevere under intensified conditions demonstrated that even when opportunities are lost at the command level, determination, planning, and tactical innovation on the ground can reclaim the initiative. The Scheldt Estuary, increasingly fortified and ever more dangerous, awaited the Allies' assault, a stark reminder that hesitation can embolden the enemy, but it can never extinguish the drive of those determined to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles and secure a crucial lifeline for the broader campaign into Germany. With the weight of strategic hesitation now behind them and the Scheldt Estuary looming as both a challenge and a prize, the task of piercing the German defenses fell to the 1st Canadian Army, a formidable and diverse force composed not only of seasoned Canadian divisions, but also integral British units whose experience in previous European campaigns lent depth and resilience to the formation. Under the decisive leadership of Lieutenant General Guy Simonds, a commander renowned for his meticulous planning and adaptability under pressure, the army faced the daunting reality that success would require more than brute strength. It demanded coordination, ingenuity, and a willingness to confront the estuary's unique and punishing landscape with precision and courage. Simonds approached the campaign not as a simple clearance operation but as a complex orchestration, understanding that the intertwined network of flooded polders, reinforced villages, and German artillery emplacements demanded a balance of aggressive maneuvering and cautious calculation to minimize losses while maintaining momentum. The soldiers themselves, drawn from the breadth of the Canadian military experience and reinforced by British comrades, brought with them not only skill but a tenacious spirit forged in earlier battles across Europe. They understood that at Antwerp's port was not merely a strategic node on a map. It was the lifeline that could sustain the Allied advance into Germany, a fact that infused each soldier with a sense of purpose that transcended the immediate danger of bullets, shells, and treacherous terrain. The 1st Canadian Army's approach combined methodical engineering with audacious infantry assaults. Combat engineers worked tirelessly to repair or breach dikes, lay paths through waterlogged polders, and clear minefields, while infantry units executed coordinated attacks on fortified villages, often under the relentless fire of coastal guns whose presence reminded every man that the enemy had turned every possible vantage point into a lethal zone. Simonds' command emphasized flexibility, encouraging subordinate officers to adapt to rapidly changing conditions in real time, a necessity when faced with rivers that had been redirected, fields transformed into marshes, and villages that had been transformed into strongpoints bristling with machine guns and hidden snipers. Artillery units, carefully positioned to support advancing troops without causing friendly casualties, unleashed calculated barrages designed to weaken enemy positions, while reconnaissance teams scouted the ever-shifting terrain, identifying routes that might permit a swift and less costly advance. The cohesion of Canadian and British forces under Simonds' leadership allowed for these maneuvers to unfold with a level of synchronization that belied the chaotic environment, demonstrating how disciplined planning and mutual trust could overcome the natural and man-made obstacles the Germans had so carefully constructed. Each engagement tested the soldiers' resilience, as they waded through flooded fields, assaulted villages under heavy fire, and endured the psychological toll of facing an enemy who had fortified every possible line of retreat and defense. Casualties mounted, yet the determination of the 1st Canadian Army never wavered, fueled by the understanding that every hard-won meter brought them closer to unlocking Antwerp and securing the vital supply lines that would enable the Allied forces to sustain the campaign into the heart of Germany. By the time the first positions along the estuary were captured, the 1st Canadian Army had not only demonstrated tactical skill and bravery, but also the transformative power of leadership that inspired initiative at every level, proving that even in the most daunting circumstances, A well-led and unified force could turn strategic necessity into battlefield achievement. Through meticulous planning, adaptability, and relentless effort, Lieutenant General Symonds and the 1st Canadian Army began to rewrite the narrative of the Scheldt Estuary, turning a seemingly insurmountable obstacle into a theater where courage, coordination, and determination would define the course of one of the most critical operations in the final push to liberate Western Europe. Every flooded field crossed and every fortified village captured carried with it the weight of months of strategic delay, yet in the hands of the 1st Canadian Army, these challenges became the proving ground for an operation that would ultimately reopen Antwerp, providing the Allies with the essential lifeline they so desperately needed. As the 1st Canadian Army advanced into the Scheldt Estuary, the villages of Hoogerheide and Woensdrecht emerged as the first true tests of both courage and strategy, revealing the brutal reality that clearing the estuary would be far from a straightforward task. Soldiers moving through the waterlogged polders quickly found themselves confronting a landscape that had been deliberately transformed into a deadly trap. Flooded fields, ankle and sometimes knee-deep in icy water, slowed every movement and rendered traditional formations nearly impossible, forcing troops to improvise at every step. The Germans, anticipating an Allied push, had turned these modest villages into fortified strongholds, layering defensive positions with machine guns, concealed mortars, and cleverly camouflaged snipers who took advantage of the terrain to strike at any exposed soldier. Every advance became a perilous negotiation with the environment itself, where the natural obstacles of mud, water, and narrow dike paths compounded the lethal efficiency of the German fortifications. In Hoogerheide, the first assaults revealed both the skill and the determination of the defenders, as every street and building became a miniature fortress, forcing Canadian and British soldiers to engage in close-quarters combat while artillery support struggled to reach targets hidden behind sturdy walls and submerged barriers. Mortars and small arms fire erupted from concealed positions, cutting down men who had already been slowed by the quagmire, while engineers worked feverishly under fire to construct makeshift crossings and bridges over flooded trenches that threatened to halt progress entirely. The combination of high water and entrenched enemy positions created a scenario where each gain of a few hundred meters felt like a hard-won victory. Yet retreat or hesitation was not an option, as the momentum of the campaign and the urgency of reopening Antwerp weighed heavily on both soldiers and commanders alike. Woensdrecht proved equally, if not challenging, as the Germans had further exploited the natural waterways to isolate defensive positions and channel advancing troops into kill zones. Every step forward demanded meticulous coordination between infantry, engineers, and artillery units. Artillery had to be carefully timed to avoid friendly fire while still suppressing enemy positions. Engineers needed to rapidly repair or construct passageways through flooded terrain, and infantry had to move with calculated precision, balancing aggression with caution to survive the relentless resistance. Casualties mounted steadily, the cries of the wounded echoing across the waterlogged fields. Yet the soldiers pressed on, their resolve fueled by the understanding that failure here would extend the already perilous supply lines from Normandy and potentially jeopardize the larger Allied advance into Germany. Lieutenant General Guy Symonds, observing the fierce resistance and the slow but steady progress, adapted his strategies to accommodate the harsh realities of the terrain and the tenacity of the defenders. He encouraged his subordinate officers to employ innovative tactics, including flanking maneuvers across submerged fields, coordinated night attacks to exploit moments of reduced visibility, and the careful use of artillery barrages timed to support infantry advances without exposing them to excessive danger. These adaptations allowed the 1st Canadian Army to slowly wrest control from the German defenders, converting what initially seemed like an insurmountable challenge into a sequence of tactical victories that, while costly in blood and effort, gradually eroded the enemy's grip on these key positions. By the time the fighting in Hoogerheide and Woensdrecht began to ease, the soldiers of the 1st Canadian Army had not only endured extreme physical and psychological strain, but had also demonstrated the importance of adaptability, courage, and relentless determination. Each flooded field crossed and each fortified building captured symbolized more than territorial gain. It represented the painstaking but vital steps towards securing Antwerp, the lifeline that would sustain the Allied advance. In these opening engagements, the brutal combination of natural obstacles and German fortifications transformed routine combat into a grueling test of ingenuity and endurance, laying the foundation for the larger and even more complex operations that would follow in the struggle to open the Scheldt Estuary and bring the Allies one step closer to the heart of Germany. As the 1st Canadian Army grappled with the punishing realities of the Scheldt Estuary, where flooded polders and entrenched German positions threatened to stall the advance at every turn, ingenuity and adaptability became as crucial as courage on the battlefield. The soldiers had learned through bitter experience in Hoogerheide and Woensdrecht that conventional infantry assaults were painfully slow and extremely costly, as the quagmire of mud and water turned each step into a potential trap, and every advance drew precise and deadly fire from fortified positions. It was in this desperate context that the Canadians turned to one of their most innovative solutions: the amphibious buffalo vehicles, massive tracked transports capable of carrying troops and equipment across the flooded terrain that had previously seemed impenetrable. These vehicles, with their armored hulls and remarkable buoyancy, allowed soldiers to move where foot soldiers could barely slog through, bridging dikes, flooded trenches, and marshy expanses while providing protection from machine gun fire and sniper attacks that had so effectively slowed earlier advances. The use of buffaloes not only alleviated the physical strain of the flooded landscape, but also transformed the tactical approach to the Scheldt campaign. Commanders recognized that the Germans had relied heavily on natural and artificial obstacles to channel and expose advancing troops. Yet the amphibious vehicles offered a way to bypass these defensive choke points, striking at enemy flanks and threatening positions that had been considered secure. Soldiers who had faced the relentless stress of waist-deep water, hidden snipers, and artillery fire now found themselves able to maneuver with a degree of speed and safety previously unimaginable, shifting the momentum in critical engagements where every minute mattered. The sight of buffaloes gliding across inundated fields, carrying platoons into positions that had once seemed unreachable, became both a practical and symbolic demonstration of how innovation and adaptability could overcome the most formidable of obstacles. The integration of these vehicles into coordinated assaults required careful planning and precise execution, as the Canadians had to synchronize amphibious movements with artillery barrages and infantry support, ensuring that the sudden mobility provided by the buffaloes did not inadvertently expose troops to new dangers. Yet the results spoke for themselves. Positions that had resisted direct assaults for days fell in hours when approached from unexpected angles, and German defenders were forced to reallocate their forces to meet threats from directions they had assumed impassable. The combination of mechanical ingenuity and human determination created a dynamic battlefield where static fortifications and flooded landscapes no longer guaranteed security, and where the psychological impact on the defenders became as important as the tactical gains themselves. Beyond the immediate military advantages, the deployment of buffaloes exemplified a broader lesson about the nature of warfare in the Scheldt Estuary. Success required flexibility, creativity, and a willingness to embrace unconventional solutions in the face of daunting challenges. Soldiers learned to operate as part of a complex system in which vehicles, engineers, artillery, and infantry all had to function in unison, adapting constantly to the shifting conditions of the waterlogged terrain and the enemy's reactions. The amphibious assaults highlighted the Canadians' capacity to innovate under pressure, turning the very elements that had once hindered them, the flooded fields and narrow dikes, into avenues for tactical advantage. By the time the initial campaigns of the Scheldt were underway, the use of buffalo vehicles had already begun to change the calculus of the battle. Where once soldiers had struggled step by step through icy water, now they moved swiftly across terrain that had seemed insurmountable, outflanking German positions and accelerating the advance toward Antwerp. Each successful maneuver underscored the remarkable blend of human ingenuity, mechanical innovation, and disciplined coordination that defined the 1st Canadian Army's operations, demonstrating that even in the harshest and most unforgiving environments, resourcefulness and adaptability could tip the scales in a fight where every moment, every maneuver, and every vehicle counted toward the ultimate goal of securing the vital port and sustaining the Allied push into the heart of Germany. As the Canadians pressed deeper into the Scheldt Estuary, it became clear that the German stronghold on Walcheren Island remained the linchpin of the enemy's defensive network, its coastal guns dominating the waterways and threatening any movement toward Antwerp. Previous attempts to breach the estuary's defenses had highlighted the sheer difficulty of the task. Flooded polders, narrow dikes, and entrenched positions had slowed progress and inflicted heavy casualties. The realization grew among Allied commanders that a decisive blow was necessary, one that would combine ingenuity, firepower, and coordination across land, air, and sea to finally neutralize the German artillery that had so effectively controlled the approaches. The plan coalesced around a daring sequence of operations in which the Royal Air Force would play a pivotal role, tasked with breaching the island's formidable dikes to flood key areas and disrupt defensive positions, while Canadian and British amphibious forces prepared for landings that would strike at the heart of the enemy's stronghold. The RAF's bombardments were calculated with meticulous precision, targeting specific sections of the dikes to create controlled inundations that would both hamper German movement and open new avenues for the attacking forces. As explosions ripped through centuries-old earthen barriers, torrents of water rushed across the landscape, submerging roads, trenches, and hidden emplacements, transforming the terrain in a manner that could have spelled disaster for the attackers if not carefully timed and coordinated. Yet the Canadians and British had learned from earlier operations that adaptability and timing were critical. And as the floods reshaped the island, amphibious buffalo vehicles and specially trained troops moved in, taking advantage of the newly navigable waters to outflank positions that had seemed untouchable from the landward side. Soldiers experienced a strange mix of exhilaration and tension as they advanced over flooded fields and along battered dikes, guided by precise maps, reconnaissance, and the cover of artillery, and knowing that every movement could determine whether the hard-won gains would be sustained or lost. The amphibious landings were executed with careful synchronization, as waves of infantry, armored vehicles, and engineers struck simultaneously at multiple points, overwhelming defenders who had relied on both the natural and man-made barriers of the island. German troops, accustomed to holding positions from which attackers could only advance slowly through narrow corridors, found themselves facing incursions from unexpected directions, with flooding now isolating units and cutting off lines of communication. Coastal guns that had once dominated the estuary were rendered ineffective, either neutralized by direct assault or rendered useless by the very floods that had been engineered to disrupt them. The combination of aerial bombardment and amphibious maneuvering demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of combined arms operations, where land, air, and engineering ingenuity worked in concert to achieve objectives that might have been impossible for a single branch of the military acting alone. As the Canadians and British pressed their advantage, the psychological impact on the defenders became evident, as troops who had expected to rely on fortifications now faced rapid advances across terrain that had previously been considered a safe barrier. Successive waves of amphibious assaults and infantry advances drove the enemy back. Securing villages, dikes, and strategic positions. Until Walcheren Island itself fell under Allied control, the capture of the island was not merely a tactical victory but a strategic turning point. With German coastal guns silenced, the Scheldt Estuary could finally be navigated safely, opening the vital supply route to Antwerp and alleviating the logistical nightmare that had threatened the Allied push into Germany. The operation highlighted the interplay of strategy, technology, and courage, showing how meticulous planning, combined with adaptability and coordinated execution across multiple domains, could overcome even the most formidable defenses and pave the way for further advances that would ultimately hasten the collapse of the German hold on Western Europe. With Walcheren Island finally under Allied control, the long-awaited gateway to Antwerp was at last open, transforming a strategic dream into a tangible reality that would forever alter the course of the campaign in Western Europe. The estuary, once a near-impenetrable fortress of water, dikes, and artillery, now lay navigable, and the largest port in the region, which had remained tantalizingly out of reach for months, could finally serve its intended purpose as a hub of vital supplies. Convoys of ships began their cautious yet determined passage into Antwerp, carrying tanks, ammunition, fuel, and provisions that would sustain an army poised for the decisive push into Germany, relieving the strain of a 300-mile supply line that had previously stretched the Allies to their limits. The relief was palpable across the front lines. Soldiers who had endured months of slow advancement and logistical uncertainty could now see the promise of continuous reinforcement, a steady stream of material that would allow the tempo of operations to accelerate and enable commanders to plan offensives with confidence that the necessary resources would follow. The impact of opening Antwerp extended beyond mere logistics. It had profound psychological and operational consequences. Units that had struggled with rationing and improvised measures now felt the tangible presence of support, while the enemy, long confident that the Allied advance might stall from supply difficulties, recognized that a new, more formidable phase of the campaign was underway. The port became a symbol of persistence and strategic foresight, demonstrating the value of patience, planning, and the willingness to confront and overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The success of the Scheldt campaign and the capture of Walcheren Island showcased the capacity of combined arms operations, where coordination between Canadian and British infantry, engineers, and the Royal Air Force had overcome not just enemy positions but environmental challenges, flooded terrain, and well-entrenched fortifications, emphasizing that meticulous preparation and bold execution could rewrite the balance of power in a theater of war. As supply ships streamed into Antwerp, the rhythm of the Allied advance quickened, allowing for sustained operations into Germany with renewed vigor and confidence. Armies could move more rapidly, striking at enemy positions before they had the chance to regroup, while the steady flow of reinforcements ensured that offensive operations would not falter for lack of material. The port's reopening also enabled strategic flexibility, as commanders could redeploy forces, stockpile critical supplies, and stage larger-scale operations that would have been impossible under the constraints of the Normandy supply lines. The previously tenuous march through France and Belgium, slowed by logistical limitation, now gained momentum, turning months of painstaking struggle into a coordinated push that would carry the Allies ever closer to the heart of Germany. In the larger context of the war, the capture of Antwerp and the opening of the Scheldt Estuary represented more than a logistical triumph. It symbolized the culmination of persistence, ingenuity, and the seamless integration of land, sea, and air operations. It validated the sacrifices made by soldiers who had braved flooded fields, entrenched defenses, and deadly counterattacks, proving that even the most formidable obstacles could be overcome through determination, planning, and coordination. The port, once blocked and heavily contested, now became a lifeline, fueling operations that would hasten the collapse of German resistance, secure liberated territories, and set the stage for the final phases of the European campaign, ensuring that the hard-won momentum of the Allies could be transformed into an unstoppable advance toward victory. As we reflect on the Battle of the Scheldt, it becomes clear that its significance goes far beyond the maps, troop movements, and strategic objectives that often dominate discussions of World War I. This battle, though frequently overshadowed by larger offensives, illustrates the profound impact of logistics, adaptability, and sheer perseverance in shaping the course of history. The struggle to open Antwerp was not won merely through force of arms. It was achieved through the careful orchestration of men, machines, and plans, where every innovation, from amphibious buffalo vehicles to precision bombing of dikes, played a pivotal role in overcoming what once seemed an insurmountable natural and human fortress. The Canadians, British, and Allied forces demonstrated that victory is often determined not only by bravery in the heat of combat, but by the ability to adapt to complex terrain, exploit opportunities, and maintain relentless pressure despite exhaustion, uncertainty, and formidable defenses. The lessons of the Scheldt resonate far beyond the narrow waters of the estuary. It reminds us that wars are often won in the shadows of planning rooms and on muddy fields, where determination and ingenuity can tip the scales as decisively as superior numbers or firepower. The meticulous clearing of flooded polders, the synchronization of land and air operations, and the courage of soldiers navigating perilous conditions all underscore a universal truth: that success in any endeavor, whether military or civilian, relies on the willingness to persevere through challenges that initially appear insurmountable. By securing Antwerp, the Allies solved a logistical crisis that could have stalled their advance into Germany, turning a strategic vulnerability into a decisive strength. As we honor the sacrifices and achievements of those who fought in the Scheldt, it is worth remembering that history is shaped as much by these seemingly unsung moments as by the headline-grabbing battles. Their stories offer a window into the resilience and creativity that define human endeavor in the face of adversity, and they remind us that every logistical hurdle overcome, every carefully executed maneuver, and every calculated risk contributes to a larger victory. Thank you for joining us in exploring this remarkable chapter of World War I. If you found this story as inspiring and eye-opening as we did, do not forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our future videos that uncover the hidden stories of history. By supporting the channel, you help us continue bringing these compelling narratives to life and ensuring that the lessons and legacies of history remain accessible to everyone. Together, we can keep remembering, learning, and appreciating the extraordinary human spirit behind the events that shaped our world.